Hello, artists. I am so excited to be back. I want to incorporate more solo episodes interspersed with the artist interviews. So, right now, I have so many incredible artist interviews lined up that I will kind of be doing some solo episodes just as bonus episodes every once in a while. So, on Thursdays, I'll throw in like maybe a bonus solo every once in a while. That's why it's great to subscribe so you never miss one of these bonus episodes. But moving forward and going into 2025, I do plan to kind of incorporate more of these into Tuesday episodes just because, from what I've heard, you absolutely love the artist interviews, but a lot of you really like these as well. So, in an attempt to make everyone happy and do what is best, I want to definitely incorporate both. And I really love these because it gives me the opportunity to really dive deep into one topic. And so, today's topic is how to price art for beginners. And I say for beginners, but really, I think a lot of people, whether beginner or not, need help with pricing. So we'll definitely dive into it. But, from my own experience, I've definitely struggled with pricing. And so I like to really share what I've learned from my own art business, from running the Scouted studio, what I've learned, through that time and what's selling and what price points are great depending on where you are. Different strategies if you don't know how to price, how to raise your prices, all of that good stuff. We are going to definitely cover all of it today. So, to dive in, let's start just talking about common pricing challenges. So, just some common pricing challenges for beginners, but really, I think for any artist, but I think in the beginning especially, there's the fear of charging too much or too little, and often that fear is validated because most artists do charge too much or too little. And I would say actually most artists really charge too little. So I would say, pulling a number off the top of my head, 95% of artists undervalue their work, mostly because they're afraid people won't buy it, or they just don't really feel confident yet, or they have this imposter syndrome. And I think what's really interesting is I work primarily with artists. I do work with a couple of men, and I love the men I work with, but I work primarily with artists, and they tend to, primarily with female artists, and they tend to undervalue themselves. They tend to price, to be transparent, too low. And I think it's because women, I've read this study that women feel like they have to check every single box to, for example, apply for a job. There was this study on LinkedIn, and it was showing that women feel like they need to fulfill every single job requirement before they apply, where men don't. And the reason I think this connects to pricing is I think women feel like, well, I need the art education, or I need to already be in a gallery, or I need to have already sold X amount or have commissions lined up to warrant a certain price. And, obviously you can raise your prices as those things happen, but I still notice that so many female artists charge way too low from the get-go. And the problem with that is art is subjective, and people believe your art is worth, to an extent, what you say it's worth. And so if you say this 30 by 30 piece is worth $200, people are gonna be like, well, what's wrong with it? Why is it so cheap? Why is it affordable? Why did you use cheap paint? Is it a print? All of these different things. And so I think it's really important to understand the value in pricing. And if your current audience doesn't want to pay the prices that you need to be charging to be profitable, they're not your right audience. And a lot of the times our first audience is friends and family, and that's not the audience you necessarily want long term. And so I definitely have a lot of strategies. We talk about it in the club a lot, how to price for the audience you have and the audience you want. But today I really want to just talk about pricing in general. So definitely there is a common practice to price too low. Occasionally some people do price too high, and obviously the problem with that is it's going to be harder to sell your work. Another just common pricing challenge for a lot of beginners is just feeling overwhelmed. So acknowledging that it can be confusing. Like, I think you need to acknowledge that in yourself and notice that like a lot of other artists feel that way. It's not just you, but there's so much conflicting advice. And I feel like a lot of coaches are like, charge more, charge less, charge this, charge that. And you see all these different artists, and it can be really confusing. And so I just want to acknowledge that that's okay. That's normal. We're going to get through it today. I also want to touch on kind of the emotional side of pricing. Creating artwork is so personal. And so it's really hard to put a price tag on something that you created. And I think there's a couple reasons for this. I think some people, there's the whole imposter syndrome, feel like we need to price low, and either in hopes that it'll sell or in hopes that, we'll get better and one day we'll price more. But I also think, sometimes we have a personal attachment and it's hard to put a price tag on it. Sometimes we feel like, well, this was really easy for me. It's hard for me to put a price tag on something that comes so naturally. But we have to move past that, and we have to think about, at the end of the day, it's something that can feel so personal to you, but this also is a business. You have to be able to kind of shift your mindset back and forth between the emotional side and then the practical, like, this is a business, I need to be profitable, and that money is okay, making money is okay. If you are profitable, you will be able to take care of yourself, do more, in your community, do more with your business. All of that is great and beneficial. So you really have to kind of wrap your mind around that. But pricing can be emotional, which I think a lot of people don't think about. So let's talk about some just practical pricing strategies. I recommend first just understanding your costs. So I recommend snagging my financial tracker. If you're in the club, it's free. If you're not, it's on Etsy. I'm happy to send it to people that, are curious about it. But you just have to figure out the cost of your materials, your time, which there's a lot of tools to keep up with that. I mean, even just a timer on your phone, figure out how long it actually takes you to create a piece. And then any, additional overhead costs, a studio, Wi-Fi, a new computer if you got one, like, what does it cost to run your business, websites, like all these different things. And I really like to break it down into kind of monthly costs. So like, what do I have to pay every month? Therefore, what is my break even? And then I think about time as sort of, okay, how long does each piece take me? And therefore, how much do I want to make based on that? If a piece takes you, 10 hours, you want to be making 10 hours worth of money, right? And then some. So what I would recommend for the cost piece is either having a spreadsheet, QuickBooks, or my financial tracker for the costs to track your expenses. And then for time, I'd recommend doing a time audit, which is super not fun. It's not great, but I did it for 1 week. I just wrote down everything I did. And I think I did it in 15-minute chunks, but you can do what works for you. And you can really start to see, one, how long it takes to create a piece, but also beyond just, we're talking about pricing today, but beyond that, you can see like how much time are you spending on social media? How much time are you spending shipping? Like, because even shipping, like you have to factor that into your costs. So definitely recommend doing a time audit because that can really tell you how long it takes to create these pieces. So first, you just want to get clear on like, what is your break even? What do you need to charge to even make your money back? Because a lot of artists don't do that. Next, I recommend pricing per square inch. So what the square inch method is the length of your piece times the width of your piece times the price you want to charge per inch. So for example, a 20 by 20 painting, if you want to charge $1 per inch, would be 20 inches is the length, 20 inches is the width, times $1. So times 1 would get you $400 for a 20 by 20 with $1 per square inch. If you wanted to charge $2 per square inch, it would be $800, if that makes sense. I recommend this. I recommend generally starting with your core pieces. So either what you're selling the most of or a piece that's kind of in the middle and then working out. So if you're like, 20 by 20 is kind of like a medium size and it's easy math for me doing this on the fly. I'd recommend saying, what, I really want to charge $400 for a 20 by 20. So that puts my price per inch at $1. Then I'll work my way out. Now on the flip side, if you sell a ton of 20 by 20s and you want them to be $800, then you realize your price per square inch is $2 and you work your way out, to your bigger and smaller sizes. Now, something to think about with the price per square inch method is it doesn't really work when you get to the really small paintings, and it sometimes can escalate really quickly if you're new for the really big paintings. So I recommend start with your core. Use it as a starting point to make sure you're increasing or decreasing at a relatively stable rate, and then edit it as needed. If something seems really low or really high, like you can tweak it. But I think it's a really good starting point. Some other things to consider is just experience level. As you would get a raise as a job, as you get represented by more galleries or you sell more or there's more demand for your work, you can raise your prices, and so I think definitely considering experience level is really important because you really want to have a system in place to raise your prices as well as you become more experienced. I generally recommend every quarter checking in and just seeing how your prices are doing, like how much are you selling, what's working. And then I recommend if you're going to kind of steadily raise your prices, think about doing it every 6 months to every year. I wouldn't do it too much more frequently than that. And I also recommend, if you are going to do it, consider timing it up with like a new collection or a new launch versus just like sweeping your whole website and upping all the prices. I think that can be kind of a more steady way to do it. Also, definitely consider doing your research. So seeing what other artists in your price, or what other artists at your level and your niche and the galleries you're represented by, just see where they're pricing themselves. Like right now I have the October Emerging Artist Show when I'm recording this, and it's coming out later, but it's going on, and it's great because all these artists could see what all the other artists that were in the show were charging for, obviously look at artists that are doing similar sized work, or, it's also framed or what have you. But they can it's a great way to just look and be like, here is a litmus test of what's working in the market. And so definitely do your research. If you, don't know where to begin, look at local galleries, look at, my website's a great place to start. Go on artists' Instagrams, stalk other artists' launches, subscribe to their newsletters. Like, one, support the artists around you. That's fantastic. But two, it's a great way to compare and see, are you falling in line? Are you way off base? Because I think sometimes artists look at other artists and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm charging half as much. And like, okay, let's raise our prices a little bit. And then the next thing to really think about is tiered pricing. So I touched on before, if you have a core audience and it's like family and friends, and for example, when I was first starting my business, I was right out of college, they could not really afford artwork. And so what you can do if you want to maintain that audience that you truly love, but also raise your prices and get into galleries that are going to need a little bit more, of a higher price point, etc. Because I know that's something we talk about a lot, is to consider having tiered pricing. So what that means is having a collection that's at that price point that you ultimately want. Maybe it's larger pieces. You only give big pieces to galleries. And then maybe you do like a smaller collection on paper every year that really appeals to that kind of lower range of buyers. So that's something definitely to think about. And, or you can just exclusively sell prints on your site. And that is, targeting that audience that just can't quite afford your bigger pieces yet. And maybe they'll grow with you and they'll afford them one day. But maybe you just target designers for your bigger pieces. Like, there's just different ways to think about it where you still can have that higher price point, but not completely alienate the audience you already have. Okay, so those are a couple of tips. Now let's talk about pricing with confidence. So this is where things get hairy. One, you have to value your time and talent. So I talked about doing a time audit and knowing what your time is worth. You have to charge for your time. I recommend doing this time audit and then doing the math of how much you're making per hour, because a lot of the times we just kind of want to make the money or want to make the sale, and we don't realize the cost of materials and then the time we're putting in. All of a sudden we're like, wow, I'm making $5 an hour. That doesn't feel great. So really value your time and talent, and also understand that just because it's easy to you doesn't mean you need to charge less. Just because you can do it fast doesn't mean charge less, because what you need to understand is you have a whole lifetime that led up to this point of you being where you are, creating what you're creating, and that needs to be factored in. I mean, that's your talent. You're unique. You can only paint the way you create, and there's value to that. Also, if you undervalue your artwork, it can hurt your reputation in the long term. It can just send a message that your artwork isn't worth what it really is, and so that can be really really harmful to your business long term. You also want to overcome self-doubt. So you need to get comfortable charging more as your skills improve. You need to get comfortable with the notion that art will sell even if you raise your prices. I think a lot of people are like, well, I sold out, I don't want to raise my prices, and then, that not happen again. And I always tell people, do the math. Say you raise your prices 10%, because the kind of understanding is you can raise your prices generally 10%, and customers will be fine with it. Like, that's a safe range to raise your prices. So let's say you raise your prices 10% and maybe you don't sell out. You only sell, 9 of your 10 pieces. You're probably still making more money because of that increase in price point. So do the math and be like, all right, if I raise my prices 25% and I only sell half, am I okay with that? I think doing some of that math can kind of make you feel better too. And then also, you gotta stand firm in your pricing. Even if your friends and family, this is usually the biggest issue, expect discounts, you have to be like, look, this is what I'm charging. And I'll say from my own experience, I've done house renderings for years. I've had to raise my prices. I don't do as many of them anymore. So now I charge a premium. I charge what my time is worth. And if they don't want it, that's okay. But what I found is a lot of people are like excited. They're like, wow, you're really growing. This is your business. Like, we are happy to pay what it's worth, versus like, they're like, oh, I don't want it anymore because it's cheap. So a lot of the times, you will have people that feel that way, but you have to understand that like your core audience will respect you. And if you do really feel like it's a close family friend or it's, your sister and you do need to give them some kind of discount, I always recommend using the language of, this is my pricing sheet. I have a standard family and friends discount, which is, let's say it's 20%. I'm so happy to give you that discount. I just want you to know, like, it is a discount and this is what I typically charge. Because then they understand, like, it sounds more like you're doing them a favor and you're excited to work with them. But they also see your regular pricing. So they don't expect you to, like, go down from $300 to $30. You're like, I'm going to $300 to $250 for you. So I'm knocking off, a large percentage, but this is what I typically charge. And so it kind of just sets them up to see the value in what you're doing. I also recommend, when it comes to confidence, just testing and adjusting. Like, pricing doesn't have to be set in stone. And so you can receive feedback from the market. So I always recommend, like, just every launch you do, take in the analytics, let it be a learning experience, and then make adjustments as needed. I don't recommend, if something doesn't sell, just slashing all your prices. I don't think that's a smart method, but you can say, okay, it seems like paper pieces sell better framed. Maybe I'll go for this price range. It seems like my current audience really wants to spend this much. Maybe I'll paint stuff that's smaller so it fits into that price point. It's not just like, oh, I'm going to all of a sudden charge way less for my bigger pieces. Maybe it's, I'll do pieces that I can paint faster, or I'll make them smaller, or it's just treating everything like an experiment is the key. So just another kind of thing I want to talk about is pricing online versus pricing in person. I think your pricing should be consistent across the board, but some things to think about if you are, selling on your own on your website. Just think about shipping costs, whether you want to build those in. Make sure you raise your prices for that. Also, you can have it be separate. That's totally fine. I think a lot of people understand art is costly to ship, but that's something you don't want to forget about including. Something else just to think about if you are selling on your own, through your own website, just think about platform fees, like what it costs. Either, Etsy takes a fee, or the cost to have a Shopify or a Squarespace website. Like, make sure you're including that in your pricing. When I talked about material costs earlier, make sure you think about things like that. Also consider, when it comes to shipping, I think a lot of the times we just think about that shipping label fee, but think about like the boxes, the bubble wrap, the packaging, all of that. And I think just at the end of the day, having clear pricing is what you want. So explaining, like, shipping's included, shipping's not included, it's not framed, it is framed. Like, all this stuff seems obvious, but I just think the more upfront you can be and the more questions you can answer before the client even asks, the more likely you're going to look professional and seal that sale, which is what we want. So just some ideas for online pricing. And then for in-person, you definitely want to just talk to the galleries you work with and make sure that your pricing is good with them. It's aligned with other people in the gallery. Again, you want your pricing to be consistent. That's the biggest kind of takeaway from all of this. You don't want to change your prices all across the board. But if you work with me, either through one-on-one or through the club, we can talk about how to work through that. If your prices are too low for a gallery, like, there's always strategies to make it work. But also thinking about, like, in-person fairs, pop-up markets, consider the overhead for those things, but also consider the market. A lot of the times people are looking for, like, cash and carry, quick items. Like, maybe that's where you bring your prints or cards, or, you have your big statement pieces, but you're more likely kind of marketing commissions. And you just really want to think about that. And so it's really, really important from a credibility standpoint to have consistent pricing across the board, but you can tailor kind of what you're selling in different places. So definitely think about that. And then finally, I want to touch on commissions. So I think a lot of people just price their commissions like they price everything else. And I really recommend charging a little bit more for commissions. So maybe it's 10%. It doesn't have to be like a huge jump, but you have to factor in that, one, it's custom. So it's not like they're just buying off their site, signed, sealed, delivered, you ship it. It is custom. Also, you have to account for that back and forth time of, like, really getting it right for them. Even if you're like, I don't even do, you should probably offer like one edit or something like that. And you can look at my commission contract to get some of those ideas. That's also available on Etsy or inside the club for free. And I think I don't remember what it costs on Etsy, but sidebar. But I recommend, just accounting for that extra time. There's going to be back and forth. Are you going to their house? Are you, bringing it in person? Are you think about all of that meeting time? And therefore, I do think you should charge a little bit more for commissions. And so just definitely something you want to consider. And then just to conclude, a couple of takeaways, when it comes to pricing, I love the square inch method. It's not a perfect system. It's a good starting point. Always recommend doing your market research and understanding your expenses. And then I touched on the tiered pricing options. So if you do have kind of a client base that wants lower priced goods, or lower priced art, but you want to get in front of a higher clientele, we kind of touched on how to potentially do that. And I just want to share that pricing gets easier with practice. You'll get more comfortable, especially as people buy things at your higher price point. I know I talked to so many artists. I was actually talking to someone in the club recently, and she was saying she had her highest piece, she put her highest price on a commission yet. The customer loved it. They raved all about it. They were so happy. And so it's you hear stories like that and you're like, why did I not do this sooner? And so I just want to share that it is hard, but it gets easier. And when you find that balance of the right price point, you're just going to understand that people are valuing your work. You feel like your time's worth it. It makes you avoid burnout, and the right buyers will find you, And so I hope this is really helpful to get you started with pricing. I know I kind of titled this pricing art for beginners, but I really think there's so much value for artists at every level listening to this. So I just invite you to share your thoughts. Feel free to message me on the Art Coaching Club Instagram, your thoughts, struggles, anything that I can do to continue to help. I also highly recommend checking out my financial tracker, which I will link in the show notes. It's also available on Etsy. And I will be back on Tuesday with another artist interview. But until then, I hope this helps you just get a little bit more confident when it comes to pricing. I hope you go in and you're like, I have a plan. I'm going to raise those prices. I'm going to set those prices. I'm not going to, fly by the seat of my pants and just give everyone a different price. You're going to have a pricing sheet. So I hope this is just encouraging to you. You really take today, to get organized and get comfortable, and trust me, even just writing on a pricing sheet and sticking to it, you will feel so much better. Having it in writing and to reference versus being on a phone call with a client and being like, I don't know what to charge. And then accidentally saying something too low because you're scared they're going to, walk away if you don't. Believe me, it is worth your time. So I hope you found this helpful. I will be back next week, and enjoy your Thursday.